Alright guys, welcome to a brand new video. So this is the current state of assembly of my 5-litre M70 V12 from my 1991 850i E31 BMW. So if you've been following along, you're probably thinking to yourselves, is this really as far as he's got in 2 or 3 months? And the answer is yes, because I only have so much time to be working on this. I only work on this maybe 4 or 5 hours a week. I only have so much time. I've been missing some parts, so these things just stretch out and just take a serious amount of time. So kudos to the likes of M539 who can build his in a matter of a week. Absolutely no idea how he does it. But the really cool thing about this is we actually have 8.5 litres of oil sitting in this sump right now. So for the purposes of oil, this engine is completely sealed apart from the valve covers. And the reason for that is I can actually run a full oil pressure test on this engine. We can basically turn it over, not under its own power, but its own battery power, get full oil pressure to the top and watch the engine as it turns over and watch the oil basically lubricate the cams. It's a really cool process. So if you hang around, you'll see that running by the end of the video. So I'm just going to run through the general assembly of the engine to get to this point. It's not a super long video like all my previous videos, but if you haven't done so, please subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on Instagram and let's get straight into it. Alright, so just a quick update on the M70 engine assembly. It's all going to plan. As you can see, I've got both of the heads installed now. I've got the inner lower timing cover installed also, and the top coolant cover here also. I'm using the complete IUSA gasket set. The quality of it seems very good. They actually include this kind of cork-like material gasket for the center coolant cap, which is counter to the BMW one, which is actually a thick papers gasket. So I think I actually prefer this style of gasket, and I'm using the Loctite 5923 on all the gaskets. It's that extra sticky substance and it gives that extra bit of seal and enhancement to all gaskets. So I'm also using it on the bolts too. You can see some of the residue kind of on the threads, and again provides that additional layer of seal so we don't get any seepage coming out through the bolts or the bolt holes or the threads. Just about to do the upper inner timing cover. I'm reusing my bolts, so I'm basically scotch brightening them, making sure they're super clean, rinsing them, then rinsing them again. There's absolutely no reason not to reuse them. They should be absolutely fine. I've got my complete gaskets here, and this is going to be a pain in the ass to install because I have to get my lower gasket here and on here. So that's 2 gaskets. Third gasket, fourth gasket, they all need to stay in place while the cover gets pushed into position, and then all the bolts can be torqued down. So an extra set of hands would be handy here, but I should be able to do it myself. So all going well. I should have all this installed in the next few moments. I've just moved on to the back of the block and I'm just sealing up this rear coolant cap here at the back. And I don't know if you remember, I had 2 helicoils installed here because both of those bolts were well stuck and they all snapped off. And there's a little bit of damage just on the sealing surface just below this sealant, and I've been in 2 minds whether to use regular gasket sealer along with the paper gasket, maybe also in conjunction with the Loctite, and I've actually just decided to stick with the Loctite by itself. There's a good few quite deep gouges just below here. I should have taken some footage of it just before I applied the paste, but I think this is more than sufficient. You can see even there it's maybe about 1 millimeter prior of the actual surface, and it's kind of gooped up and combined together, and I think it's going to seal nicely along with the paper gasket. So I think that's more than sufficient and probably a better option than mixing different chemicals on the back of the block, especially on the back where it needs to seal perfectly because I'm never going to be able to get at it again. I think that's more than sufficient to get the seal proper. The oil pump went on without too much hassle. It's a little bit of a confusing process because there's only so much slack in the chain, and you basically need to make sure that the chain is installed on the lower sprocket first, obviously on the crank, and then this sprocket needs to be inside the chain when you push it onto the splines of the actual oil pump itself. But you need to make sure you have enough movement or enough slack in this chain, otherwise you can't actually get this sprocket onto the oil pump. And to do that, you basically need to make sure that this bolt is removed. I had both of these torqued down to spec, and basically you can push the oil pump downwards. Basically you get enough slack here. This tiny bit of space here is the space that you need to push the whole assembly slightly down, and that gives you enough room to actually slide that sprocket on, if that makes sense. So once that's all done in the correct order, it mounts on pretty easily. I also have my correct amount of movement or amount of play, which is 8mm from side to side, and that's absolutely bang on. It's 8mm from this position to this position, and again that's adjusted by the Allen key down here, that actually adjusts the standoff. So yeah, all in all, it went on pretty smoothly. Skipping ahead a short time later, you will see I actually have all of the timing gear installed on the engine, and it's all timed to perfection. So I have my sprockets installed on my cams, I've got my brand new chain, there's an original OEM BMW chain, and I also have the brand new chain on the oil pump also. All went together nicely. I have the slack correctly set on the actual chain itself here down to the oil pump, and it took a bit of effort, a few attempts to get everything correctly timed. But essentially, once my crank pulley is installed and everything's lined up to the timing mark, all my cams are absolutely spot on, and I'm using my timing tools to make sure there's no gaps at all. As you can see, it's absolutely perfect. So I'm very happy with the timing on it. Inner upper cover was installed, nicely sealed again. I'm still using the same Loctite 5923. It's great for getting the gaskets and keeping them in position until you actually have the cover installed. I did the outer lower cover last night, 10 Newton meters for most of the bolts. I think it was 22 Newton meters for the 13mm bolts down the bottom. But yeah, everything went absolutely fine, and the chain is perfectly tensioned as well. It has the correct amount of slack, 6mm of travel on the tensioner, plus or minus half a mil if I recall. So that's absolutely spot on too. I have my banjo bolts wired up, as you can see, so there's absolutely no chance of these becoming undone, which is very common on the M70. You can thread lock them, but this is the hardcore way to do it, so there's absolutely no way they're going to come undone. What I want to do as well is, before I put the valve covers on the top, is to actually get the starter motor installed, get the underside of the engine, all the pans back on the bottom, and actually fill it with oil. Run the starter motor and get some oil pressure up, and get the oil to the top of the engine to make sure it's coming at these oil sprayer bars, and to ensure I'm getting correct pressure, and to make sure everything is getting oiled correctly. So looking forward to that. The engine does turn over fairly freely. There's a bit of resistance, more resistance than I recall, but I'm pulling that down to the new rings. Those new rings are going to be generating drag and a bit of friction on the cylinder walls, especially without full proper lubrication as well. So yeah, just takes a bit of effort to get the engine spinning, but it does spin. Well, I suppose once there's a bit of momentum going, it gets going fairly quickly. So that's where it's at the moment. Sometimes you really have to stop yourself from becoming lazy and complacent regarding certain areas of the job. As you can see, everything on the table here looks pretty immaculate. What I've been doing is bead blasting all of these components right back to the raw metal because it was very rusty, and just spray painting where required. As you can see, both of these engine mounts came out absolutely immaculate. I did the heat shield as well. This is the aircon mount, and this is the power steering pump mount as well. This is the main crank pulley. This is the pulley off the PS pump itself. And as you can see, everything came up absolutely immaculate. I had done these before, but using sandpaper doesn't do the job. You need to blast that surface layer of rust all the way back and then spray paint it, and then everything just comes up absolutely immaculate. And what I mean by becoming lazy and complacent regarding certain jobs, so all these bolts belong to these components, these set of 3 of each. So this is typically the condition of the bolts. Poor, you know, from an aesthetic point of view, they'll work perfectly fine, but they look poor. But those 6 bolts belong to this pump here, to the pulley, and for actually mounting onto the pump bracket itself. 6 of them belong to both of the engine mounts, and this set belong to this bracket here for mounting onto the side of the block. 4 of them belong to the aircon mount here, and these all, including this bent one, so I'm going to have to replace that, belong to the crank pulley itself. That's the bung as well for the actual sump. And what I mean about becoming lazy is, as you can see, I bead blasted these. So I took them out to the sandblaster and blasted the tops of these with the intention of, you know, that's good enough. And when you look at the head, you know, it looks nice and clean and fresh, but that's going to rust in no time. It's not going to last. So like I mean, I was cutting corners. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zinc plate them myself. Now I could send them off, or I just could buy new bolts, but you should see the price of these bolts. It won't surprise me if all of these bolts, because you typically have to buy more than required. Some of the larger bolts you don't, but there could be €100 in bolts here. So, and I also am conscious that there's plenty of bolts that I'm going to have to zinc plate as well, especially when the valve covers goes on. There's lots of components there and lots of components dotted around the outside of the engine bay, and I want to be able to zinc plate them as well. So I'm going to do a test batch. I've picked up some components for zinc plating, and I'm going to give them a go. And as I say, most of the bolts in the car look like this or a whole lot worse. That's about as good as they get. So it's definitely worth an effort. I'm going to do a test batch. I'm going to blast these all the way back to the raw metal, just like the heads. And then we're going to test out a batch of them and try out the zinc plating. So I'll show you the parts that I've picked up for the zinc plating. This is it, guys. This is the setup. So as you can see, I have a battery caddy with 2 D cells. That's 3 volts in total. I've got some crocodile clips, and I have this clear plastic tub with 1 litre of solution. Now the solution is comprised of 400 ml of vinegar and 600 ml of distilled water, making up 1 litre total, and is about 100 grams of salt dissolved in the solution. I also have 2 zinc anodes, which you can just get from Amazon. They're quite cheap. And as you can see, I have them wired together. So I basically ran this under voltage, so essentially connect up the crocodile clip for about an hour or so, and that gives or allows some of the zinc to be suspended in the actual solution itself. Now you are supposed to run it for a good few hours, but I've only run it for about an hour and I've got good results. And what I'm essentially going to do is I'm going to suspend the actual bolt. So I've already done a test. This is one of the bead blasted bolts. So it has been completely degreased. It is crucial that it is fully degreased. There's no oils or anything on the actual bolt itself. And I'm going to suspend it in the solution essentially on a stick and apply voltage to the end of the cable. And essentially it's going to transfer the zinc component, I suppose, and plate it straight onto the bolt. And it takes only about, well, I have it in for about 3-4 minutes. It's probably done before that, but it's a remarkably quick process, and I'll show you how it works. I'm just going to place my stick straight across the top and suspend my bolt, which again has been completely degreased, and it keeps it in an upright position right in the middle of both of the anodes. And as soon as I apply voltage, you'll start to see it start to fizzle in and around the bolt. And the process has already begun. So straight away you can see how vigorous it is. And there's quite a reaction there. So we're going to give that about 3 minutes or so, and then pull it out and see what it looks like. And just to cover the wiring again, so like I say, I have this caddy which I got from Amazon. The positive runs all the way around and runs onto this anode here that connects to the other anode, and then we have the negative that comes from the caddy, and that just connects directly to the bolt. So essentially the solution is the electrical connection between basically both of the plates and the actual bolt itself. So we're approaching 3 minutes now. Let's pull it from the solution. And there we go, that's the finish. Absolutely remarkable how it comes up like that. You'd swear it's been painted. Now there's a bit of a shine on that. Once that dries off, I'm going to just dip it in some distilled water. But once that dries off, it will be a lot less glossy. Essentially, if you want to get a kind of glossy finish, it is a dull finish by nature, the zinc, so you have to polish it up to get any kind of a gloss finish on it. But just to show by way of comparison, this is a different bolt, but that is the bead blasted material, and you can see the difference there straight away. So I've got 6 more of these to do. These belong to the actual engine mounts themselves, so I have another 5 to go, and yeah, I should be done in not long, 15 minutes or so. (100 Newton meters). Time for this crank bolt. Hold on to your butts. Oh my god. 120, that's it. Christ alive. $22 Newton meters. All right, here goes nothing. And that is 7 litres now installed in the motor. That brings it up to the top mark. We're just shy of. Finally we got there, we have everything assembled. We have the starter motor on, we have the motor filled with oil, and I've got my battery pack hooked up here to my starter motor. Now I still haven't run this, so this will be the first time that I've actually provided power to the motor, and the motor is actually turned over essentially by itself and not by hand. And the function of this test is essentially to make sure I'm getting proper oil pressure, to make sure that the oil pump at the very base is actually providing upward pressure to the oil spray bars along the top, which is the uppermost section of the engine. So I've never done this before. I haven't actually seen any videos of this, so I'm not sure if we get oil spraying everywhere. I'd imagine because the chain is spinning this way, we might get some flick from this side. Again, I've got no idea. I don't know how messy this is going to be, so I'm going to stand back. So all I have to do is essentially connect up my negative to the battery, and everything should start spinning. So, but what I'm going to do first is turn the engine over manually by hand. As I mentioned, I have about 7 litres in the block. That's actually not enough. It probably will have another litre or so essentially once these upper reservoir lines fill up. So anyway, I want to turn over the engine a good few times. There's a few methods in terms of priming an oil pump. A lot of people pack it full of petroleum jelly. That's something that I didn't do, but I want to get a good amount of oil inside the oil pump, at least get it pumping, a couple of inches upwards through the block, and I'm going to do that manually now by hand. So yeah, let's do that. Okay, let's start spinning this round. It's moving nice and freely. I want to try and get a bit of momentum going here. Funny, and actually just there now, everything's so much easier to turn. So the oil is getting in and around, but it's not showing up at the top of the engine here. I have a funny feeling there's no way I'm going to get sufficient pressure just doing this, considering the speed the starter motor turns the engine over at. Okay, so everything sounds good. I think that's about as primed as I'm going to get it. I'm not even sure if that did anything, but let's give this a go. Oh, and actually this is the starter motor connection setup. As you can see, we are providing direct 12 volt power to the large terminal, which is the large battery wire connection, and we have the larger gauge of the white cables also plugged in with the same 12 volt source. So we're just going to ignore this connection here and make sure that doesn't get grounded. So essentially this connection here bridges onto the output of the solenoid into the starter motor anyway. So all we need is this single 12 volt, so the motor should turn over. Here goes nothing. Going to stop it there. Oil level is way down, it needs another litre added. That's looking better. Perfect. Interestingly, what I've noticed is on this, which is the left side head, oil pressure seems to build from the rear and slowly traverses through the oil rail and up through the block, but it starts at the back and moves towards the front because oil pressure seems to be slightly lower on these two front cam lobes compared to the rest. And on the right side head, we're seeing the exact opposite. Oil pressure seems to build from the front and again traverses backwards. We're seeing once again slightly lower oil pressure on the rear cam lobes. Now I'm open to correction on this. I'd be interested to hear what people think in the comments, but I can only imagine when the engine is under its own power, it's spinning 10, 15, 20, 25 times faster than it is right now. Oil pressure is essentially equalized between all the cam lobes, completely equal all the way down both of the oil rails, compared to just running off the starter motor where it's running incredibly slowly by comparison. So all that being said, I'd like to get a closer look at the oiling process. So I'm just going to connect up the battery again and we'll take a look and see how well the cam lobes are being oiled. Here we go. So that is the current status of the engine itself. I still obviously have a major amount of work to do in regards to getting the top end back on, valve covers, get the intake on, get it sealed correctly, all the ancillaries, all the belts, ignition system, fuel delivery system, the electrical system, all that needs to get reinstalled onto the engine. But I'm confident that that should go relatively quickly, certainly in comparison to this, because this work here, this body of work, takes a serious amount of time and dedication and part sourcing, an absolute pain. I've already sourced all the external parts from my previous videos, because pretty much everything that attaches to the engine is new, so I have all that set aside, so that should go pretty quickly. And I think the next time you see the engine, it's just going to be fully done. I'm probably not going to cover adding those parts back onto the outside. So once the engine is done, I can set it aside, stick some plastic over it and focus on the body work, because there's a major amount of work involved there. But the really cool thing is, there's been going on in the background, I've actually got the entire interior in a crate and sent it off to Poland to Marek Neuser, who is an E31 interior genius, is the only way to describe it. So if you just Google his name, Marek Neuser, you'll see it pop up, E31. He's got a full gallery of all his previous work. His work is exquisite. So top class upholsterer. He's been specialising in E31s for years and years, just knows them inside out, even has all the interior parts just ready to roll if you don't have them yourself. And the only thing I'm undecided on is as to whether to go fully original. So I think it was kind of a mid dark grey that I had in the car previously. I might go one touch shade lighter. Again, I'm not fully decided. But I've essentially sent him the front seats, the rear seats, the whole centre console, the rear armrest, all the door cards, A-pillars, C-pillars. He's going to do a whole new headliner for me. We're going to do a fully leather covered dash, CSI door cards. It's going to be exquisite. I just can't wait. And it's kind of lit a fire under me, because once that interior is done, I'm going to want to get that into a finished car. So follow along. Like I said at the start of the video, if you haven't done so, please subscribe. You can follow me on Instagram, and I'll see you all in the next video. Thanks for watching.